valmiina. Jos ei ole, niin niitä saa tuolta molempien sisäänkäyntien luota. Tarkoituksena on, että kysymyksiä, kommentteja, puheenvuoroja voi käyttää tässä aamupäivällä molemmilla kielillä, eli ihan rohkeasti vaan sit kysymään vaikka suomeksikin, jos siltä tuntuu. Mä olen tosiaan Kaisa Penimaan Kalevi Sorsa-säätiön toiminnanjohtaja, ja meillä on tosi suuri ilo, että me saatiin tällainen iso eurooppalainen, Euroopan tulevaisuutta pohtiva seminaari tänne Helsinkiin meidän pitkäaikaisten yhteistyökumppanien kanssa. Suomessa käydään edelleen liian vähän laajaa Eurooppa-keskustelua. Meillä edelleenkin jossain määrin jumitutaan sellaiseen keskusteluun, missä puhutaan siitä, että puhutaanko Euroopasta ylipäätään, tai puhutaan siitä, että pitäisikö meidän seurata esimerkiksi Iso-Britanniaa Euroopan unionin jäsenyydestä, ollaanko jäseniä vai ei. Ja aivan liian vähän puhutaan siitä, että minkälaisen unionin jäseniä me haluttaisiin olla, minkälainen Eurooppa ja minkälainen Euroopan unioni on se, mitä me halutaan tulevaisuudessa rakentaa. Ja se keskustelu nimenomaan on tämän päivän tarkoitus. Tänään meillä on todella korkealaatuiset paneelikeskustelut, 2 paneelia tässä aamupäivällä, joita meillä on ollut ilo ja kunnia saada 2 tosi ansioitunutta toimittajaa puheenjohtamaan. Mä esittelen heidät vähän myöhemmin ja sitten laadukkaita puhujia ympäri Euroopan paikalle aiheesta puhumaan. Ja sitten iltapäivällä meidän on lounaan jälkeen 4 työpajaa, 2 suomeksi ja 2 englanniksi. Niistäkin kerrotaan vähän lisää myöhemmin, ja tosiaan toivon, että mahdollisimman moni osallistuu aktiivisesti kaikessa tässä keskusteluun. Seuraavaksi mä annan puheenvuoron meidän kumppaneille. Meillä on siis tosiaan saksalainen suuri think tank Friedrich Ebert Foundation ja sitten eurooppalainen think tank FEPS täällä meillä järjestämässä, ja sen jälkeen mä vielä pikkasen kerron käytännön asioista ennen kuin päästetään panelistit alkuun, mutta for you, Christian, it's very great that you're here, that we have a great long-standing cooperation with FES, and that we got to organize this amazing seminar today together. So please, it's your turn now.
Thank you very much, Kaisa, for the kind words and the wonderful introduction. And I have to apologize for not speaking in Finnish. I will improve. When I come next time here, I will at least try to prepare 1 or 2 sentences in Finnish, I promise. But maybe if you allow me to, I would like to start with a personal note. I was, so to say, politically raised in the 1990s, and if you have been around in the 1990s, and when you remember the political debates in this time, you remember that it was a time when we all believed that there was a kind of ongoing process of deeper European integration and a more wider integration, that we have kind of mutual solidarity across Europe, that we have international solidarity, and it was undoubted somehow. It was the spirit of these days in the early 90s, as far as I remember it. And now, 10 years after the crisis, we have a totally different political climate, as you are all very well aware of, with a strange mix of populism, of authoritarian notions in politics, growing nationalism, so counter forces, I would say, to European integration. But then again, we also have counter forces to that counter forces again. At least in German politics, we have a growing movement, for instance, called Pulse of Europe. It's a youth movement, young people that go out to the streets and shout for more Europe and more European integration. And as far as I understood, this event today should contribute to support these counter forces to populism, to authoritarian answers to the challenges that we have. And I'm very grateful that we as Friedrich Ebert Stiftung can take part in this event. We have a long-standing close cooperation with Kalevi Sorsa Foundation and of course with FEPS, and I'm happy to see so many of you here. You know, it's kind of surprising, I would say, that around 150 people come on a Saturday morning to discuss the future of Europe. That's fantastic. I'm glad to see you all here. I'm looking forward to the debates we have today, and I hand over to David, and thank you for the wonderful cooperation.
Thank you. Yes, briefly, please allow me to say a couple of words of greetings on behalf of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, mostly to say and stress how happy we are of gathering all these people here today, not only to speak about Europe, but to speak in a European event. Today here we have Italian, Portuguese, Dutch, German, Hungarians. So it's actually a very good way, and we should do this increasingly often, to discuss together our joint future. Because as you know, as Europeans, we might have, and we might come from very different cultural backgrounds, very different stories. I have to admit I know very little about what happened in Finland 4 centuries ago, for instance. But one thing we are all sure is that we are all much more similar if we look at our ambitions, if we look at our futures, at the challenges and solutions that we have to find towards the years to come. So if we have this ability to look at what comes, we will realize that we are all more brothers and sisters than we actually thought. And we are super happy to collaborate with the members foundations, Kalevi Sorsa and Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. When we first discussed the topic, I have to share with you that the first thing that came to my mind when we discussed about shared prosperity was a very influential American movie. I don't know if you've seen it, Into the Wild. You have this Harvard graduate that goes around because he doesn't really like the society as it is. He doesn't feel like he fits into the society. And he goes to look for himself, to look for the truth, to look for the real sense of life. And after years, towards the end, he, in a moment of suffering, he realizes what is the actual truth, and he writes in a book, he writes something like, happiness only real when shared. And today for us, we can motivate that because all these positive feelings, all the prosperity, all the well-being, all the happiness that we have, it really means nothing if it's not shared, if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't actually help everybody. I think that is a very distinctive difference between our progressive family and some other political counterpart. And we need to somehow reappropriate of this sharing concept, the idea of prosperity as shared, how much we actually gain from sharing. And today we will discuss what is the meaning of this sharing in different aspects of the European Union, you know, migration, climate change, but mostly also in the way in which the economic governance is framed. We have the pleasure today to have here two influential former commissioners that were there and actually helped improving the governance of the economic structure of the union during the crisis. But now I think we can fairly admit that they have been able to play the role of firemen, as Jacques Delors is usually addressing. So with the urgency that was there during the time of the crisis, they've been able to keep things together. Today we ask them as well to work as architect, so to think in a longer term, in a moment in which we have better economic conditions. We have now the chance to restructure partly the architecture of the economic governance and to think actually how that can also integrate some aspects of sharing and solidarity between countries and within countries. I conclude with one word of caution, because this morning, of course, we will have very interesting debates. I hope you will enjoy. But we will also have very interesting workshop sessions that are specifically designed for you to participate and engage. So I'll check each face. I will remember each one of you. So you have to stay because the topics are extremely interesting, and we need your inputs and participation to discuss some ideas in concrete and have really your guts, your feelings. So stay with us till the very end and please participate. Thanks a lot and enjoy the discussion.
Thank you very much, David. Just a couple of practical things still. You can all see that we have a hashtag Call to Europe. So if you are on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and participate in the discussion, use the hashtag and we can have them with us as well later. At the same time, not only with us, but this seminar is one in a series of Call to Europe seminars that take place across Europe in different cities, in different countries, and they come to conclusion in February, I think. So there is also not just us here, but the discussion goes on, and all the inputs that we have from here, this whole event is streamed, and the video of it will be then found later. All of this will contribute to European debate and discussion on the future of Europe, not just now, but for the months to come, and to kind of academic, think tank, politicians, society discussion for the later as well. Thank you very much for you two, and thank you very much for being here. And next, as I said, that we have two very distinguished journalists running the panels today, which means that we will actually have a really good political debate on the issues, and not just monologues, but the dialogue and discussion. And the first moderator, I would like to invite Paavo Teittinen, who's an economic journalist from Helsingin Sanomat. For those who don't know, Helsingin Sanomat is the biggest newspaper in Finland, and he's one of the journalists over there working and trying to make sure that we still have, first of all, quality journalism in Finland, and then second of all, wide and open discussion on economic issues and also international issues. So thank you very much, Paavo, for being here, and I give the floor to you and room to run the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaisa, for the kind words. I'll try to live up to them. And welcome everyone on behalf of me as well. Welcome also to the people watching on the live stream. So like Kaisa said, my name is Paavo Teittinen. I'm a journalist for Helsingin Sanomat. I'll be moderating the upcoming discussion on the economic options for the EMU. We have an excellent panel, so let me invite them up here because it's a bit lonely. So Mr. Olli Rehn, Miss Anne Pettifer, and Mr. Laszlo Andor. Please welcome them to the stage with applause. Okay. So a few words about our panelists. The person to my immediate left is Mr. Olli Rehn, in case you don't know him. He is the governor of the Bank of Finland, and crucially, he also used to be the economic commissioner during the Euro crisis, so he brings a sort of a vast knowledge on these topics to the discussion. The person sitting in the middle is Anne Pettifer. Anne is an economist who has written extensively on the financial crisis, among other things, and now she directs the policy research in macroeconomics network, PRIME, that's correct, right? And Anne also advises the British Labour Party on economic issues. And finally, we have Mr. Laszlo Andor. Laszlo Andor used to be a colleague of Mr. Rehn's in the Commission as the Commissioner for Employment and Social Affairs and Inclusion. And now Andor works as a senior fellow at FEPS, right, and head of the Department of Economic Policy at Corvinus University. So, welcome to all the panelists. A few words about the structure of the conversation. The panel will be discussing the European Monetary Union for around 50 or so minutes, and after that we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So think about good, short questions while we talk. We're going to try to break the discussion down into sort of three loosely defined categories of problems, solutions, and the future. But we're going to see where the discussion goes and let it flow freely as well. And right now we're going to begin by having all of the panelists present one slide briefly that sort of captures some of their key points about the topics we're going to be discussing. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Olli Rehn to speak about his slide in case, thank you, we have water, in case this works. There we go. Olli, the floor is yours.
So, thank you, Paavo. Good morning to everybody, and it's great to be here at the University of Helsinki and in this great company. I'm also very glad to see so many long-standing friends on the European journey around here, and glad to be in an event organized by the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation because I had the pleasure and honor to work together with him in the European movement of Finland in the 1990s when we had the referendum on EU membership. He was a member of the Presidium, and I was then an activist in the Workhorse Executive Committee, which did the practical work for the yes side in the campaign. But as regards today's agenda, I think it's very important to start from the current state of the real economy, so that we see that the euro area has now and is enjoying still a long recovery since 2013. After we had, after difficult decisions in tough times, we were able to stabilize the situation in 2010, 2012. Now we are on the 6th year of recovery, and unemployment has come down substantially from 12% to 8%. 9 million jobs have been created in this period, and also the coming years look reasonably positive for the euro area. But at the same time, risks and fragilities remain, both globally and internally. Of course, the threat of a trade war is a very serious risk and uncertainty, even though I have to say that the European Commission and member states have so far played our cards well, in a sense that the main tension is between the United States and China, and it's also a matter of technological leadership, long-term economic leadership, while Europe has been able to so far calm down both main trade policy fronts with the United States and with China. That's very important for Europe and for Finland. Now, how should we proceed from here as regards the monetary union, economic and monetary union? Of course, one issue is policy. We may discuss this, but I just make a side remark that it's important that we engage in a gradual, lengthy process of monetary policy normalization, so that we will not shake the foundations of stronger, solid growth and better employment. As regards institutional issues, I think it's important that we use these better economic times now to complete the work on the economic and monetary union, especially concerning the banking union. It may not sound overly exciting or sexy to say that it is important to complete the banking union, but it is fundamentally related to the root cause of the financial and debt crisis, which was the neglect of financial stability in the Maastricht talks and in the architecture of the economic and monetary union, for which we paid a very heavy price as Europeans. So therefore, my main thesis is that at this stage it would be important to finalize the banking union, which means in practice creating a strong enough backstop for the single resolution fund, which is used or intended to use for bank resolution in case there is a need for that in systemic banks in Europe, to create maybe stepwise, gradually, a European deposit insurance scheme, and also to reform the decision-making of the European stability mechanism, which together with the European Central Bank was playing an essential role in stabilizing the situation in Europe. And here I think one key issue for the political debate and policy debate is, which is unfortunately has been dividing Europe, and where I think we should build bridges and not draw new red lines, is the question of how do we balance risk reduction on one hand and risk sharing on the other hand. By risk reduction I refer especially to the non-performing loans in the banking sector, which are a burden in many countries like Italy, even though Italy has done actually quite a good job in the past 3 years on those. While on risk sharing I refer to stronger joint insurance structures at the level of the European at the level of the Eurozone. And here, in fact, you have two different economic philosophies. One which I would name the German economic philosophy, entre guillemets, because it's not only a matter of nationality, it's a way of thinking. Another one, say, French economic philosophy. German philosophy underlines countries' own responsibility and wants to build a stability union without too much risk sharing, while the French way of thinking is more inclined to underline joint structures of stabilization and insurance at the European level, and to reinforce the Eurozone, leave less, in a way, responsibility only to member states. So my thesis is that let's not draw red lines and only say no, but rather try to build bridges and synthesis between these two economic philosophies, in a way the German and French way of thinking about the economic and monetary union. One final point, this is not only a technical matter, it is anything but a technical matter, because the euro and the economic and monetary union is at the core of the European Union, and in the current world full of uncertainties, full of threat of trade war and other major problems, full of threats to liberal democracy and rules-based international order, the European Union is the bastion and standard bearer of liberal rules-based international order, which is very important for countries like Finland. And in order to play a strong role for this, we need a solid and stable Eurozone, and that's what this reform is aiming at.
Thank you, Olli. And now let's hear from Anne. There we go. Anne, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm afraid my slide tells you very little about what I'm going to say. It tells you that I'm selling a book. I apologize for that. I want to say this. Thank you very much. That's the right answer. I want to begin by saying that I am opposed to my own party's position on Brexit, the Labour Party's position on Brexit, and I'm arguing very strongly, as far as I can, in Britain, for Britain to remain a member of the European Union. And I want to make that clear because I'm now going to be quite critical, but I want you to understand that I believe that the alliances across the European Union of progressive forces is, for me, vital to face the really big threats that we face. And for me, the biggest threat of all is the rise of right-wing authoritarianism and fascism. And that is my main priority at the moment. But I want to begin by just tackling some of the points that Olli Rehn has just made. And that is about the euro, and about, he said the euro is at the core of the European Union. I agree that it is, and I agree also that it is the most divergent thing in the European Union. It is the thing that has caused divergence, not convergence, within the European Union. And unless the euro is reformed, and unless we tackle the institutional structure of the euro, we can expect further popular uprising. I'm struck by the fact that it was here in Denmark in 1992 that the Maastricht Treaty was rejected by the people of Denmark. And then the French very narrowly agreed to the treaty after a lot of coercion. But there have been popular uprisings in Europe since the governance of Europe tried to impose on the people of Europe institutions that were beyond accountability, and in particular financial institutions, beyond accountability to the people of Europe. And the people of Europe have known that since 1992. This is not new. Popular uprisings are not new. So for me, what the real aim of the euro is, and of those who are constructing the new capital markets union, is to construct something that ensures that the state gives up authority over its citizens, and instead allows authority to shift to capital markets, to financial markets, most of them invisible. And behind the ideology, because it is an ideology, is the idea that financial markets should be protected should be encased, protected from any threat of democratic intervention. And that is the nature of the capital, the plans behind the Capital Markets Union. It's the nature of globalized, financialized capital today. And it is the thing that people are standing up against and rising up against. Karl Polanyi taught us that if we create markets in capital or trade or labor or property that are self-regulating markets beyond the reach of regulatory democracy, then people are going to look to be protected from those markets, because those markets are imposing suffering on the people of Europe and the United States and the world. And when they look for protection, they look towards a strong man, invariably, the odd strong woman, but mainly a strong man. And that could be Putin, that could be Mr. Orbán, it could be President Trump, and for me it is also an indication, it's also behind the Brexit uprising. So people look for protection from markets that are doing them harm, harming their own futures and the futures of their children, because these markets operate beyond regulatory democracy. And until Europe and the European institutions and the European elites understand that they have to once again be answerable to their people and not to financial markets, for so long will the European Union be fragile and be subject to divergence and possibly to disintegration. I'm very struck by the story in today's paper about the Banksy painting that was sold at Sotheby's yesterday. When the bidding reached $1.1 million at Sotheby's, and the painting was on the wall, it was of a little child with a balloon. And as you know, Banksy is a street painter, he's a graffiti artist, and this is taken off from a wall. When the bidding reached $1.1 million, when the art was financialized to the tune of $1.1 million, something inside the painting exploded and the painting disintegrated in front of all the bidders in Sotheby's market. Just like that. Now this is Banksy, who's a revolutionary artist, and I have to commend him for this, because what he was doing was fighting the financialization of culture, right?
Did she get her commission anyway? So
I don't know. I mean, we must hear the story. The question is whether Sotheby's got their commission. Their commission is very high. So the point is this, that exactly the same thing could happen to the euro. It could happen, it could disintegrate. And I say this because in 1931, the gold standard, which is the model for the euro, suddenly one day, boom, just disintegrated. The British dropped out of the gold standard one day, and the next day it no longer existed for the British economy, and the British economy began to recover. British politicians and British economists and British policymakers began to respond to the needs of the British people, and we began to recover from a period of intense economic failure. And it happened overnight. And when it happened, everybody said, I didn't know this could happen. I didn't know the gold standard could collapse. Not so easily. So I want to warn policymakers in Europe that if we want convergence, if we want the southern states and the northern states to work together, if we want Britain to be part of the European Union, then much must be done about bringing back markets and making them accountable to the people of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And then a few words from Laszlo Andor.
Okay, huomenta. It's really a pleasure to be here and in this team on stage and discuss EMU. With Olli, we have been working on the crisis response, and as he already explained, we believe that this reform of the Economic and Monetary Union must go ahead in order to avoid that the next European leadership finds itself in the same situation, trying to tackle the same type of crisis, which can indeed ruin not only the single currency, but a lot what has been built in the European Union. The sun is shining today over the Eurozone and over the European economy in general, but we have to repair the roof when the sun is shining. And I think we believe that the speed of this reform of the monetary union has probably been insufficient. Most of the measures that have been outlined, for example, by Oli, have been on the table, subject of discussion for quite some time, but not really moving forward. So in these circumstances, every single sign of positive step sounds like an encouragement. And let me just mention one, which came to me as a kind of surprise, but a very positive surprise earlier this year, when the finance minister of Germany, Mr. Scholz, gave an interview to Spiegel. And he said that he is in favor of an unemployment reinsurance scheme in the Eurozone. This is something you wouldn't expect from a German finance minister. And this is very much a step out of the tradition, not only in Germany, but let's say in general, the so-called core countries, the financially stronger countries of the Eurozone. Nevertheless, he repeated this earlier in September when, alongside Mario Draghi and Pascal Lamy and other distinguished figures, they had a very important meeting, a similar one to this, in Berlin. And trying to bring the audience into this mindset that indeed the resilience of the monetary union needs to be strengthened, and this is quite urgent. This is quite urgent for economic reasons, but more importantly for political reasons, which Anne also explained. Now, this idea that the Eurozone needs some kind of unemployment insurance or reinsurance is not entirely new. The only new element is that now a finance minister of Germany is also advocating it. But this is a very important sign of a recognition that sharing prosperity, which is our aim, actually starts with sharing risks, preparing for the bad times in a way that we should be able to help those who fall victim of a crisis and receive a disproportionate hit when a shock hits the community or a shock hits some part of the community, which is more or less unexpected. And most of the economic shocks actually produce unemployment or mass unemployment. So dealing with unemployment, dealing with the consequences, should be more a shared concern in the European Union. And I collected here actually options, because we were invited to discuss options. And this is, again, something which does not only have one model. In fact, there are many economists working on this issue. The top one you can see here is actually Finnish, Professor Oksanen, if I pronounce the name correctly. And he, for example, once came to the European Parliament to explain a scheme in which, after a long period, for example, 7 years, you would take stock and then you would compensate those who were doing not so well in the monetary union. So a kind of GDP transfer ex post based on the so-called output gap. I don't want to be too technical, but his stabilizer scheme was not linked to unemployment, but still trying to play a kind of ex post stabilizing role on the basis of solidarity. And a German economist who is in the bottom right corner here, Sebastian Dulin, he has been working on a completely different scheme. In fact, he suggested quite some time ago that there should be a European unemployment benefit scheme, which would be topped up by the national schemes. But when the difficulty comes, first of all, the unemployed people would receive support from the European scheme, which could be topped up and extended depending on the national circumstances. So obviously, Finland would be more generous than Greece on unemployment support, but that would be perfectly fine. The scheme would still play a stabilizing role if established. Now, this is not the only way to combine national and European. You can reverse it, which is something Mr. Daniel Gross, the central personality on this picture, has been advocated in recent years. In other words, to develop a reinsurance scheme The national schemes are functioning, but when there is an extraordinary shock, you have at hand a rainy day fund, and you manage to top up the national facility, because what you have to avoid in the recession time is to reduce the eligibility or reduce the generosity of the unemployment support. This is also something Olaf Scholz was stressing 2 weeks ago when he explained his own proposal in Berlin. Scholz actually said at this stage that he would like to have a reinsurance mechanism based on loans. I think this is probably something that needs to be discussed and hopefully reconsidered. But the recognition that we need actually more solidarity, and the Eurozone would be seen as a prosperous and legitimate system if it combines the stability element with solidarity, with a better balance. I think this has been recognized, but now the discussions and probably also the decisions would need to go forward faster than in the past few years in order to prepare for the next economic downturn in better conditions.
Thank you, Laszlo. Let me put this. There we go. Okay, so let's get into these issues and problems and solutions as well. I wanted to ask Laszlo and Olli, because you two were in the Commission during the most difficult years of the Euro, whether you agree with at least some of what Anne Pettifor said about European institutions being beyond accountability, beyond the reach of the people, and that has caused backlash we've seen in the last few years. Do you agree with that sentiment, Olli?
I can see that, well, we all know that there was a strong dissatisfaction during the crisis because of the very difficult measures. And in fact, I worked quite a lot with political leaders who came from the Social Democratic family at the time in Greece, PASOK, in Portugal, PS, and in Spain, PSOE, Zapatero. And in a way, I could see the pain in that political movement as well. And this is related to how people perceive Europe, and that comes to the question of what Anne raised, in a sense that originally we created, in a way, a social contract with the Maastricht Treaty, so that if you want to join the Euro, then you have to respect certain rules. That was then reinforced by the Stability and Growth Pact in the 1990s and the reform of economic governance in 2010, 11, 12. So, in a way, the logic is that if you accept if you want to be a member of the Euro, then you also have certain responsibilities, and pacta sunt servanda, you should respect the agreements that you have signed. And one of these which is very topical today, for instance, in the context of Italy, is should you respect the rules you have yourself as a nation signed as regards fiscal policy and sustainable public finances? My answer is yes, but I know that it's a very complex construct and dating from history which a nation has signed up to, while the people today may not recall what they have signed up to as a nation.
Let me take that segue, because you mentioned the EU budget rules and Italy. So let's get specific. The EU budget rules have come under criticism in the last few years. Last month, top economic advisors from France and Germany issued calls for an overhaul of these rules. I'm quoting from the Financial Times. The advisors say the rules are unenforceable and may have worsened the sovereign debt crisis. They are riddled with exemptions, poorly adapted to crisis fighting, and so complex that even experts cannot work out whether countries are compliant. So that sounds pretty bad. Olli Rehn, I want to hear from you too, but first, Olli, do you support some kind of an overhaul of the EU budget rules or no?
Yes, I do. I think, as I said, the most pressing, the most urgent reform is to complete the banking union, so that we have a stronger financial system which will not take also the states or the sovereigns into abuse if we have economic and financial problems. But I think the proposals of the German and French economic policy councils make plenty of sense, and they have been actually for many years discussed in the economist community. And you can coin it, it is an expenditure rule, which we have, for instance, in Finland. We basically copied it from Sweden some decades ago. And it's applied, for instance, in countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, and Finland. And it works well, it works better than the quite complicated EU rules. But at the same time, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, we need some rules at least. So before scrapping the current rules, let's first agree on future better rules.
And Anna Pettifor, what do you think?
So first of all, I mean, Olli says that when the nation states sign up to join the European Union, they have certain responsibilities. The first thing that they have to do is to give up responsibility to their citizens and hand responsibility, for example, over monetary policy to the European Central Bank, which is filled with technocrats who are accountable to no one, right? And that is very, very deliberate. The idea was to create a central bank that would be above democratic interference. And secondly, on the budget rules, the Maastricht Treaty is based on ideology. It really is. It's based on the idea that you can take economic policy and turn it into concrete and put it inside a constitution and make it fixed. And that is not possible. That is not economic policy. That is an ideology. Economic policy has to shift and to move. It has to adapt, especially in capitalism, to business cycles. You can't have economic policy buried like concrete in a constitution or in a treaty. And that's what we have in Europe. So we have these crazy rules which nobody understands and which Italy has said, I mean, what I find extraordinary, Italy has said she will have a budget deficit of 2.4%. That's lower than the very unacceptable and very arbitrary rule of 3%. And yet it has sent the markets into frenzy because the officials of the European Union have made such a fetish of 3%. If you make a fetish of 3%, then you can create frenzy in the markets around 2.4%. So, and you know, the thing that I think
you will scrap them. You will scrap the budget rules.
You can't have a budget rule. The budget must respond. The budget is like a share of the economic cake, right? When the economic cake shrinks in a recession because of a financial crisis caused by the bankers, then the deficit expands, just like a law of nature. When the economy expands like the cake gets bigger, then the deficit shrinks, again like a law of nature. So the fact of the matter is that you can't say that the deficit must be this much of this big cake or this much of this little cake. It is irrational, it is not rational. But it is it's part of an ideology of suppressing the role of the state and expanding the role of markets. That's what it is.
Let me hear from...
And it has caused intense harm across Europe. The austerity of the period of the sovereign debt crisis is what caused the European crisis. It's what exacerbated and deepened the crisis so that today Europe's growth of rate, according to the OECD, per head of GDP, is the lowest amongst all the advanced economies. So we can't celebrate what has been achieved. We can't.
Let me bring Laszlo in and then allow Olli to respond. And Laszlo, one of the things that the French and economic advisors said was, let's keep the 3% deficit rule, but let's sort of take non-discretionary spending like interest payments and unemployment benefits which go up in a recession. Let's put that outside of it. So what do you think EU budget rules should be overhauled, and if so, how?
Well, I think there is probably agreement that there is a too narrow focus in the Maastricht vision of the economy, and the struggle in the last 6-8 years has been about how to reconcile a rule-based system with more investment, because if you don't invest, you never come out of a recession. And I think Anne has a point, obviously, that it was very, very difficult at the time of 2011, 12, 13 to achieve this in specific countries. Perhaps now more has been done, but in a way, the criteria have not been repaired in the sense that they only focus on the so-called nominal convergence, as opposed to what we call real convergence, right? So that was a very early criticism of the Maastricht vision, that it ignores real GDP, it ignores the unemployment level, and it also ignores the current account balances, surpluses, or deficits. So actually the real imbalances in the economy which can undermine the system. But this has been recognized. In 2010, that's exactly why the so-called macroeconomic imbalances procedure was introduced, not to scrap the criteria, because there are some who insist on the criteria, and in a way you cannot have an integration without rules, but to diminish the importance of these criteria, to treat them with more flexibility, and then shift the focus, for example, on current accounts, unemployment levels, pension system imbalances. The problem is that the action regarding current account imbalances have not been so forceful. It's very, very difficult to tell countries to bring down excessive current account surpluses. That's why, in my view, for example, there should be a tax on current account surpluses if there is a violation for too long, and the rebalancing of the European economy would come faster, and the peripheral countries would not be forced into austerity the same way as in the previous cycle.
So the Commission would essentially tax Germany for having too big...
Not the Commission, the European Union would need to
yeah.
Introduce some kind of more effective action, something more effective than prayer.
Okay. Olli Rehn, you wanted to respond to Ann Pettifer's comments.
In fact, I was about to say the same as Laszlo, but I can just illustrate this with one concrete example, which is that we created, together with Laszlo and the rest of the Commission and the European Union, we created the macroeconomic imbalances procedure indeed in order to facilitate a more, balanced rebalancing of the Eurozone economy, in a sense that when we had to adjust as the Eurozone, we would not only see more rigorous fiscal policy in, say, Southern European countries or crisis countries, which had not too much of a choice at the time because their public finances were in shambles. And in order to have a more balanced approach, then the idea was to encourage Germany, the Netherlands, and other surplus economies to invest more and also to raise wages because they can afford to do that. Now, unfortunately, or in reality, there is no mechanism to force a member state to do that, and that's why the rebalancing was less, flexible, less balanced than it could have been. But one further point is that I think, even though I take some of the criticism which Anna makes and can agree with that, but on the other hand, you're also making a caricature of the current budget rules of the European Union, because there is much more flexibility within the rules, especially if a country engages in structural reforms and can argue that this is convincing, then it can have some more room of maneuver in fiscal policy. And I can tell you an example on this. When I went as a negotiator during the previous coalition talks in Finland in spring 2015, at the request of Prime Minister Designate to talk with the Commission so that could we have some more flexibility as Finland, because we needed more flexibility in fiscal policy from the budget rules in return of certain structural reforms like the Competitiveness Pact and other reforms. So I flew to Brussels, had an appointment with my successor, Commissioner Pierre Moscovici, and I explained to him that we are doing this and these structural reforms to reinforce the economy in the coming years, so we need to build bridges in a Keynesian way. So could you accept a little bit flexibility in the budget rules? Well, first we both bursted into laughter because he had been coming to me in 2012-13 and proposed the same for France, which we
Did you say
accepted.
Yes?
I said yes, and that's in a way worked for
Quid pro
France
quo, yeah.
as well. So that was acceptable for the Commission, and it shows that there is a reasonable degree of flexibility in the fiscal rules.
Well, let me ask Anne, it seems to me that the actions that the ECB has taken or has promised to take with the OMT program, for example, and other institutions have effectively tackled the problem of a possible liquidity crisis that countries might face. But it also seems to me, and a lot of experts say, that the Eurozone still hasn't tackled the problem of a solvency crisis, and there's a lot of talk about, do we need more market discipline? I guess the German approach combined, which essentially would mean, for example, that banks would be forced to hold less exposure to their home countries, and we would have a debt restructuring mechanism for Eurozone countries that would sort of kick in before the thing gets too bad, and perhaps with the common fiscal backstop.
Bank debt restructuring.
Right. No, for a sovereign debt restructuring.
A sovereign debt restructuring.
So what do you make of that? You're critical of the markets, but do you think that this might actually be a workable solution to have sort of more market discipline with a working debt restructuring mechanism for the sovereigns, perhaps some kind of a common fiscal backstop to help finance that?
To be honest, I don't think we should be preparing for crises, for sovereign debt crises. We should be preparing for prosperity. That's what we should be preparing for. And I mean, I just think that public finances get into a mess for two reasons. One, because politicians can be incompetent, and that's pretty common, and they can be corrupt as well. There's a fair amount of that, and that happens across the board. But public finances mainly get into difficulties because the financial sector is liberalized and deregulated and out of control. And it's financial instability, financial volatility that exacerbates the state of the public finances. Fix the financial stability and you will fix the public finances, and you won't need to think about debt restructuring. I mean,
and I think they want to hand the mic to you because...
Oh, sorry, is there a problem? Sorry, you won't need to think about sovereign debt restructuring because that is a very traumatic process for any sovereign. You don't want to get to that position. You want to be managing the financial system so that it doesn't cause public finances to get out of sync.
Isn't the sorry to interrupt, but
so if we talk about Greece, for example, Greece got into terrible difficulties because by joining the European Union, the financial system was liberalized. The Goldman Sachs of this world believed that German taxpayers were behind Greece and therefore lent Greece crazy money. And Greece borrowed crazy money and should never have done that. And as a result, both her private finances and also public finances were out of control. But before Greece had access to this liberalized market, she didn't have these problems. So we have to look at the way in which financial liberalization causes public finances to fall out of
So you don't think that the banking union that's being built right now is enough to...
No, and by the way, the banking union is yesterday's story, right? Our big problem now is the shadow banking system. The traditional banks have had a little bit of regulation, have been cleaned up, they've cleaned up their balance sheets. That's not our problem. Our problem now is that we have a shadow banking system which eclipses the standard high street banking system and which is out of control and which the European Union is now suggesting should be part of a market-based financial system which bypasses the banks, basically.
Let's have Olli respond and then Laszlo Andor.
I think that's more of an Anglo-American view because in the Eurozone we have a stronger financial regulation and supervision, and we have a smaller shadow banking system. I agree that we have to follow.
But last week, Mr. Draghi said it was $42 trillion.
We have to follow this very carefully, and we have to, of course, reform the banking union and banking supervision in the light of this. It's an evolutionary process. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that the remaining reforms in the banking union are insignificant. They are very important, and I hope that also the Finnish government, this and the next, can support those reforms.
And can I say, I agree with Olli that it is Anglo-American. Yeah. And that's one of my critiques of the British approach to Europe, which is that we've imposed Anglo-American ideas on the European Union, and that's part of the reason there are problems here, and I agree with him.
Let's bring Laszlo under. Laszlo, what do you make of the banking union, the progress we've had so far? We haven't had a common deposit insurance system still in place. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and also on this notion of sort of bringing in more market discipline and having a debt restructuring mechanism, which seems to be making the rounds these days.
Well, I do believe the banking union is necessary. In 2012, when this turnaround happened, that instead of disintegration, the Eurozone started to go towards a reconstruction, it was very clearly outlined that a banking union, a fiscal union, and a political union would be needed, maybe not in the same way as the United States of America, but important elements of all this. And in the previous commission, while we were still there, two important chapters of the banking union were completed: the regulatory and the resolution mechanism. Now, since then, there has been a lot of talk about the continuation, but I think without the third leg, which is the deposit insurance, it's not improving the situation. In some cases, it might as well be bringing more risk than there would be otherwise, especially.
Also, you think the banking union can work without a common deposit insurance system?
It's not a full solution. It's very controversial in that way. Let's put it this way.
Right.
I will come back after all this.
Okay, go ahead.
One brief point. We have actually, in a way,
Can you help Laszlo under with his mic?
We have a debt restructuring mechanism in the banking sector today.
Right.
And that's the current legislation which was enacted in 2014-15, which has a very exciting name, the Bank Recovery and Resolution and Recovery Directive, which has strong bail-in rules, which means that the banks have to hold enough capital which can be bailed in to equity in a way, so that the banks in resolution would not have the possibility of using taxpayers' money to the extent that happened in the previous financial and banking crisis. And this is helping to break the toxic toxic nexus between the sovereigns or states and banks, in a sense that banking problems will not become problems of member states. And this also implies that if you complete the banking union, you have actually somewhat less need to create a fiscal union, which is politically much more controversial in the European Union.
Right.
So here we go, you see. This is about showing that, you know, we can get the financial system to effectively be the government of the European Union. We don't need a fiscal union. A fiscal union would involve, you know, taxpayers and responsibility to taxpayers and accountability to taxpayers. But by creating this capital markets union and a banking union, you can avoid that, and you can have a new form of governance, which is effectively financial governance.
Do you see the threat in the same manner as Anne, Laszlo?
Well, I think, in my view, even a perfect banking union is not a substitute for fiscal risk sharing. I think there is a need for a joint fiscal capacity one way or another, exactly for the reason which I mentioned, to protect investment and specific types of investment like social, and to ensure that in a crisis time, which is happening, so you cannot perfectly eliminate the risk of crisis, to avoid that countries start to disinvest from the sources of long-term economic growth, which is human capital at the end of the day. So we haven't secured these aspects, and that's why reforming either the criteria or the governance or establishing a more robust fiscal capacity remain absolutely crucial.
Right. Olli, you wanted to...
I think in Finland there is quite a broad consensus on the fact that certain policy areas and their budgetary implications are better to be left to the level of the member state, which means decided within the frame of democratic decision-making in the member state. And these include, by and large, social policy, social security, which are big bulk of the welfare state. And I think this is quite widely shared within the European Union, not only in the northern countries, but more broadly in the European Union. And that's why I would be quite cautious of moving on this road. I can see the case for economic or automatic stabilizer in a crisis if it is constructed wisely. But at the same time, let's do it so that we will not create a union of permanent transfers, because that would not be acceptable to the people of the member states of the European Union.
So you're not warming up to some of the options that Laszlo talked about, common unemployment insurance pools, different scenarios that have been proposed?
Some of these options might work, like the one of, say, the reinsurance scheme of Daniel Gross, if you accept that you take a big leap towards a political federation, which that implies, so that the decision-making would be then at the level of the European Union.
Can I ask you?
I think on the permanent transfers, I think it's important to recall this fact, nevertheless, that we have in Europe some member states, some nation states, or unitary states, federal states, which have an internal system of permanent transfers. And think about the political consequences. Obviously we have Italy, where Northern Italy and Mezzogiorno are in tension. Northern Italy is subsidizing Mezzogiorno substantially. We have Belgium, Flanders almost striving for independence at some point in relation to Wallonia. And we have Spain, Catalonia, the rest of Spain. So I'm not very convinced that bringing these tensions which permanent economic transfers tend to, in broad sense, tend to create to the European level would be very beneficial for the European Union.
As we move towards the Q&A, I want to, there's been a lot of different policy proposals in this discussion. Obviously, we've only touched the surface because it's such a broad topic. But let me ask you to sort of wrap up your ideas about what the future EMU might look like. We have the French approach of risk sharing and the German approach of risk reduction, if you want to sort of caricaturize a bit. What are we going to end up with? What do you think, Laszlo Andor? What will the EMU look like in the future? What kind of institutional structures? Where do we end up on the axis of the German and the French approach?
Well, it's very important that it's convergence between Berlin and Paris, but the European Union is much larger than just France and Germany, so you have to have a more inclusive approach. In a way, you can say that both Germany and France belong to the Eurozone North, the Eurozone core, either AAA or AA countries, which have no problem in terms of meeting the criteria with some flexibility and also managing finances in the crisis time. But there are many other countries, because of all these imbalances and financial flows, which find themselves in a completely different situation than either France or Germany. And their perspective also has to be appreciated if you want to maintain cohesion. And you cannot forecast everything. A country like Finland also found itself in a recession after the only major company of the country went under. And
not the only one.
We have others.
Sorry. And the Russian sanctions also were biting back to some extent.
Sure.
So you also need some kind of preparation.
But in concrete terms, that's a good point, but in concrete terms, what do you think the EMU will look like in the future?
There is a need for more solidarity, to use simple language, and also to continue more forcefully the regulation of the banking system and force a different behavior among the banks. The moral hazard which people sometimes talk about when the risk sharing comes to the picture has not been tackled in the area of the financial sector sufficiently. I think this is absolutely key.
Okay. And Anne Pettifor, for you, if you look at the European Monetary Union, what do you see in the future?
Yeah, what I see is a monetary union. And what I think we dreamed of, and what I think was the hope of this union, was be an intergovernmental union that would bring peace to Europe. And we've lost that vision. We've lost the vision of solidarity and peace across Europe and of cooperation and coordination. I'm always reminded of the story when in 1950, Schuman went to see Stafford Cripps, who was at the time the Labour Party's finance minister, the Chancellor. And he talked about this vision of the European Union, and Stafford Cripps went along with it. And then he said, we're going to need a high authority. And Stafford Cripps said, what do you mean by a high authority? He said, well, we don't know, but we'll flesh it out. But it'll be a high authority. And Stafford Cripps said, we cannot join. We cannot be part of that. So the British began to reject this idea of an unaccountable authority over nations back in 1950. So the Brexit vote is not a sudden thing, it's part of a long process. So when Europe was when we agreed to the single market, we traded with each other, that was a really guarantee against war, and that we were beginning to create the relationships and the solidarity and the union that we wanted. It's when Europe moved into becoming a monetary union and putting the monetary as the high authority that we lost the vision, and that I think will actually then lead to, ultimately, to the disintegration of Europe. The European people won't stand for it.
Well, I'm going to give the last word to a representative of a monetary institution. Olli, what do you see when you look at the future of the European Monetary Union?
I see challenges ahead, both in the real economy, which we have not discussed so much today, and also in terms of institutional reform. Actually, I belong to those, I'm a functionalist, maybe the last functionalist in Europe, but I belong to those who believe that the real economy, what's really happening for sustainable growth and job creation is by far more important than only the institutional reform. But I see that we will, and I trust, I hope we will complete the unfinished business of the banking union so that we can break this nexus between the banks and the states so that banking problems will not burden the taxpayer in the future. I see that we may move towards some kind of a Eurozone fiscal capacity, maybe in the context of the EU budget to support investment together with the European Investment Bank. And I see that we take certain steps to further reinforce the European stability mechanism so that we are better protected preventively if there is a looming financial crisis. So these are the things I see that, and as regards policy, I think it's important that we will maintain such kind of gradual, stepwise normalization of monetary policy. We continue to do economic reforms in the member states to increase productivity, employment, and that we have a consistent approach in fiscal policy.
Thank you. Let's take one question. There's a man over there. Can we have a mic for him? Yes. And there's another one. The two questions and then we are out. Yeah. Can you please introduce yourself and keep it short because we're running out of time.
Okay. Hello, my name is Robin Forsberg. I'm an economist. So my question is about money supply and inflation, because I think that's very, very important for EMU and also ECB. So in classical macroeconomics, there's a demand, there's a relationship between money supply and inflation. So when you increase the money supply, which has happened now in Europe with ECB's quantitative easing, 2.5 trillion since 2015.
Can you please get to the question? We are running.
The question is, the relationship has broken down. So we have a liquidity trap. We don't get down. We don't get the inflation what we need, which is problem for economic growth and so forth. What is this implication for EMU if this relationship has broken down forever?
Thank you. And then one question there, and then we're out. We have a gentleman by the side. I think it's, yeah, there we go.
Thanks. My name is Leo from Transparency International. We work on Eurozone democracy and transparency. My question is risk sharing and risk reduction not literally the same thing, and the people who construct a separate thing between the two, or even an opposition, are literally just playing for time? And connected with that is, does governance not directly lead to outcomes? Olli, as someone who has worked inside the machine and had to react ad hoc to the crisis and so on, I think you would know very well how governance actually affects the policy outcomes.
Thank you. Okay, very quickly we have to get out of the stage. Olli Rehn, has the link between money supply and inflation broken down? Are you worried about that?
Depends on which measurement of money supply you use, but if we take the broad view of this, so you are of course right that even the quite large-scale monetary easing or quantitative easing by the European Central Bank has not yet raised the core inflation to the target level of below but close to 2%. And there are several reasons for this. Economists and central bankers all over the world, especially in Europe, are analyzing, pondering these reasons. I just name two. One is the question of low anchored inflationary expectations because of the financial crisis, and the other one is the lower natural rate of interest. Both these imply that it makes sense to continue with gradual process of monetary policy normalization.
Thank you. We're going to have to end there and get the other panel going. I'm sure the panelists will be happy to answer your question after this talk. So please give a round of applause for our excellent panel.
Thank you very much for our panelists. It was very, very interesting discussion, and I think we could have continued a long, long time with that. Thank you also for Paavo Teittinen for moderating it and bringing very, very interesting and hard questions for the speakers here. For the next topic, we will have a question on the political options, the political future for the European Union. So we're changing a little bit to a wider, perhaps, perspective. For that, we have another great journalist to moderate the discussion, Kirsi Heikel. She's worked a long time in the current affairs programs with the Finnish broadcasting company Yle, and has a long history in questioning politicians. If those of you don't know, she used to run the pre-election prime minister debates, for example. So she's got a very long-standing history in asking tough questions and demanding also answers. So we hope that we have a very good discussion here as well. Kirsi, please be welcome. One more thing I want to mention is that after this panel, we will have a summary. The leader of the Finnish Social Democratic Party, Antti Rinne, will be summarizing what we've heard today and giving some remarks, but that will be in Finnish. So if some of you don't speak Finnish and need the headsets during this panel, it would be worth getting them so you can also understand the summary. But now, Kirsi, please, we're welcome.
Thank you so much, Kaisa. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear friend Mia-Petra, thank you so much for joining us here today for this next debate where we are going to talk about the future of European Union. And I believe we are going to concentrate in a couple of simple questions. What is going on and what should we do about it if we want to have more integration in the European Union? If we don't want to have, then what should we do then? Should we go backwards or back away? We have three panelists who will look at our topic from different perspectives, and I would like to ask them here in front one by one before we go and sit down. And please help me in welcoming Maria Rodriguez. Maria, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. You are the Vice President of the Social Democrats in the European Parliament and also a member of the European Parliament. And you have written many books about European Union. And a few years ago, she wrote a book about the future of European Union and the current situation. And the title was Europe is Still Possible. I'd like to know if you wrote a book now, what would be the title?
Exactly the same, I must say, because I really believe that Europe is possible and necessary, as I will try to show why.
You would have the same title?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
You believe you're in...
Because we need to keep a sense of positive engagement and hope, and I really think that Europe is more necessary than ever.
Okay.
But I will argue
yes,
about
absolutely. Please take the seat that you want to have. And let's welcome our next panelist. He is Andre Kraul. Andre, great to have you here. You are a political scientist and also professor of comparative politics and communications. You come from Amsterdam.
Guilty.
Yes, guilty. You're also, he's also guilty to something else I want to let you know.
What are you going to say?
I'm going to say this thing, not that one.
Oh, good.
Okay, good. Founder of Election Compass. You are a founder of Election Compass. That is a system that helps voters to find perfect match.
No, there's no perfect match in politics.
Really?
A good match, maybe, but no perfect match.
There are no perfect match.
No.
It's
no.
like
everybody who has a partner knows that there could be a good match, but nobody's. That's not perfect.
A good match. But this is something that's been also, you have project in over 50 countries, in all of the European Union countries. What are you developing at the moment?
Well, I have to confess here that I'm also not only a professor, but I also own a company, so I'm also an entrepreneur. And we work in more than 43 countries, actually, including the Middle East. We make basically websites during elections where we identify the most important issues, and then users can go there, voters can go there, and see which party best matches their own political preferences. But in the back end, of course, I do academic analysis because I want to look inside the heads of voters and what people think. And the debate we just had, and I will argue this also later, is not the debate that people are having. This is not the way that people think about Europe. They don't think in these structures and these institutions. There's a morality of Europe, and we have to talk about that because that's how people think about Europe.
Yeah, so this is a compass that also the politicians should use and read.
Oh no, they hate it.
Oh, why?
Well, we expose them for what they are, because so politicians love to blur, for example. So imagine you have an issue. Imagine you're a social democratic party just by accident. Okay, social democrat. So you have immigration issue. Totally problematic, because part of your electorate doesn't want immigration, wants to at least curb it. Part of your electorate is actually the sons and daughters of immigrants. So now you have a real problem. What we do is, if a social democratic party is not clear what they want to do on very specific stuff in terms of immigration, we force their pens down, telling us, no, it needs to be clear to voters what you're suggesting, compared to, we do this with all the parties. And so politicians hate my guts. Usually, in most countries.
We'll see what they say now, today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I can run fast, so.
Yeah, the doors are closed.
And doors are
let's keep this exit for him clear.
Yeah.
Please, let's do it. Okay. Andre, please have a seat.
Thank you.
And then our perfect panelist from Finland, Anton Rönnholm. Let's give a big hand to Anton also. Anton, welcome.
Thank you, Kirsi.
General Secretary, Social Democratic Party. Also, you lived many years in Brussels. I have to ask you something also. The latest polls are looking very good at the moment. Our next Prime Minister might be just sitting down there. You'd win the Parliament elections, but what about the European elections, European Union's elections, Parliament elections? You have 2 seats now. What's your goal for the future?
Well, we will clearly have 3 seats. We have good candidates here, like
Only
Kaisa
I mean,
and Mia Petra. Well, I mean, we're looking at 1 more seat for Finland in those elections, and I think these elections, like the parliamentary elections, are very crucial for our standing in Europe, because we will first formulate what the future government will be thinking of about the integration, about the state of the EU and where it should be going, and then in the European elections we'll be deciding upon what kind of European Parliament we'll be having, because there will be huge changes also with the eventual Brexit and what have you. So that will be a very challenging time for Finland to lead the presidency then in July 2019.
Okay, but the answer was 3 seats at least.
3 seats at least, yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, have a seat.
Thank you.
There's a seat. And ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a little bit of a hint what we are going to talk about. I thought we'd start with the current situation. What is going on at the moment with integration? What do they see that is working? What is not working? What would they like to do about it? Let's have some concrete answers. And then I'd like to hear your thoughts, your questions, your remarks. You don't need to have a question. Maybe there's just something that you have noticed and you want to check. Something about the current situation. And then let's move on to enlargement of European Union. Is that possible? And also, let's take a bigger picture with the foreign politics. EU needs to have a stronger common voice. If we look on what Mr. Trump is doing, what's happening in eastern part of this globe, how can we have a stronger voice for European Union? What do they see, and what are your questions and also comments there? I have a mobile phone in my pocket, so I will make sure that there's time for your questions. But dear panelists, let's have, with a few words, your thoughts about the current situation with the integration. Maria, please.
Look, we're in a situation where the problems from the past, and in the previous panel we were discussing about these, the financial, economic, social crisis. Let me tell you my opinion about this. We are halfway to respond to this problem. That's why this discussion on how to complete the economic and monetary union remains relevant. So we are still dealing with this. Of course, we are now in less dramatic times, but still this is necessary to prevent the risk of new crises coming. But in the meantime, we were confronted with new crises.
Okay.
One around refugees migration, which is in fact is a larger issue because this is about the relationship between Europe and the neighborhood. Ultimately, this is what is at stake when we speak about migration. It's how we deal with Middle East, how we deal with Africa, particularly. And then, more recently, we are having an important change in the world order.
Yes.
If you see the combined effect of Putin, Trump, China is also in a big move to become a key, absolutely key player. And we need to discuss, among us Europeans, why we need Europe for.
Okay. Let me ask you, with a scale of 1 to 10, what's the number, what is the figure for the European integration? If it was under Lisbon Treaty, maybe, let's say 9. We were very hand in hand, all the countries. Where are we now?
Well, I was part, as you know, of the team negotiating the Lisbon Treaty. By that time, we attempt really to create a political union, and we updated all the tools to make external action on trade, on development, on international cooperation. And we had no time, let me underline, to deal with internal policies. These remain incomplete. The Lisbon Treaty is incomplete from this viewpoint. But still, there is a lot of potential.
Okay, but the number would be 5, may I guess?
Yes.
What would be? What is your number?
Well, my number is more than 5. Be about 6 and 7 because of the new international situation. Because now we see that united Europe in the external front is decisive when we want to tackle climate change. How can we make sure that the Paris Agreement on climate change will be respected if we don't use the full weight of Europe?
Exactly.
The same in trade agreements. We are now negotiating 3 trade agreements. The next one will be with Japan.
Okay, Anton,
we need to use Europe.
What is your thoughts on the current situation and integration?
Your question was what is working and what is not.
You can also go to that question.
Yeah. So if I'm very boring and I look at the competencies of the European Union, what are the competencies? What the European Union has to do. Particularly, we're talking about customs union, we're talking about trade and fisheries, and then if we go further on, where you have shared competencies with the member states, it's about the internal market, it's about the environment, it's about agriculture, research, energy, and so on. And where the member states have their own particular their competencies, it's about economic policy, employment, and social policy. And where the greatest problems lie for the moment, it is in this last sector. So whether we have problems like we do have with Trump and so on trade policy, this is not because of the European Union, it is an external problem that comes from there. So my conclusion is that the European Union is actually doing fairly well, even though there are these big problems that we just heard when it comes to social exclusion and so on in the last panel. And the scale that you proposed from 1 to 10 and so on, I would put the scale in a different way. I mean, Andre was saying something about politicians, that they can be a bit shrewd in their own way of forming things. So I would put a scale of, if you look at science fiction movies, where you see these white rooms in the future with the global government, where they're dealing with the huge issues of how to maintain the global situation, or whether there's a meteorite threatening the globe or something. Why are these science fiction fantasies? Why is not the scale of 10 that we put, this is actually that we are aiming at? We are aiming at a global governance that is prosperous and that brings peace to everyone. And on this scale, if we're looking at, we're not yet very, very far, regardless of what the Lisbon Treaty says.
Okay.
But I think this is something that we should be aiming at, and
So
the
you-
European Union is one part of
So you think that we're doing well? You saw some dark clouds in some topics, but Andre, how do you see the current situation?
Yeah, talking about science fiction. If you think at this moment that the European Union is doing well, I don't know what statistics you're looking at. I'm looking in the heads of people, and I see disintegration. You see that support for the European Union is down, fast down. You see that countries are deciding to leave the European Union. If you want to see integration, that's fine. I see disintegration, and I also know why you see disintegration. Imagine you're in a world where 2 or 3 post-war generations have lived very much above their station. They have put countries in enormous debt. On top of that, they never paid the cost for all the ecological damage that they did living in a carbo economy. They've never paid for that, and they're not willing to pay for that. They are going to protect their own interests, and they're all in politics, and they're all between 45 and 70 years old. There's a new generation now that needs to pay much more for education, that needs to pay much more for housing, and they will be footed the bill for these 3-4 generations that have lived above their station, including myself. Thank you very much for my nice salary and my full pension. But young people will pay for that. Young people will also pay for the ecological cost, and on top of that, we build out banks. We build out banks, the most criminal organizations, I think, currently in Europe, without anybody going to jail. They fooled us all, and we gave them hundreds of billions of euros that you young generations are also going to pay. Imagine what that will do. And all the generation that will protect their interest will never pay for this, will block any political solution in which they contribute, and a young generation that's footed that bill. What do you think will happen? Integration? I don't think so. Disintegration will be the future of Europe.
But those problems that you mentioned, you find that the European Union is the one to blame.
Well, the European Union was the promise that we would have
we would have peace.
We would have peace.
We
yes.
have peace.
Well, okay, so tell that to a generation that never saw war. So support the European Union because we have peace. That's not the argument, because we do not have peace, because there have been wars fought even in Europe. We have a black hole in Europe where people have been killed, where there have been horrible violence. Tell women that we're not that we're all in peace when they live in a world where not everywhere is safe. I think it's such a nonsense to say, well, there hasn't been a third world war, so long live Europe.
Okay, let's hear
The promise of Europe was not only no war. The promise of Europe was a fairer society, and we have not yet created that. In fact, there's more inequality than ever. The 10 richest households in Europe own 50% of all our wealth. And the top 40% have less than 3%. Is that peace?
I don't think we disagree, Andre, with you on the fact of that there's a lot of inequality and there's a lot of problems. But what I said that we need to measure the success of the European Union with the competencies that we've given it. I mean, if we as member states and governments want to keep certain competencies to us and do stupid policies, that is then up to the capitals to do, and we cannot blame the European Union for that, even though we can say, like it was clearly said by Anne Pettifor in the first panel, that there is this global neoliberal way of economic thinking that is completely enshrined in the European project nowadays. It did not used to be the problem during Jacques Delors.
And many social democrats.
Yeah. Okay, Maria, what do you want to reply to, Andre?
What is the problem? Because indeed there is a problem. The problem is not that we have now a lot of Europeans thinking about leaving the European Union. This is now unhappily confined to the United Kingdom. And I still have hope that they will rethink about this choice. But on the other hand, it is true that the European Union is not working at the level we want it to work, that's for sure. Because people, they feel they are losing control in their lives, in their working conditions. And this is the outcome of an extreme neoliberal agenda was put into motion over the last years, and which has created a Europe that does not protect. So in front of these, now we have a new political picture. We have some new actors saying, we are coming to protect people. And we think that in order to protect people, we should go back to national policies alone and to national borders. This is, let me tell you, a big illusion. Of course, we do need good national policies, but national policies alone are no longer enough. We need to complement these with strong and progressive European policies. When we are tackling climate change, when we are negotiating about trend, when we are framing the current digital revolution, let me give a concrete example. Okay, digital revolution. Yep. This is changing almost everything in our lives, including our working conditions. We have more and more people, particularly young people, working for online platforms.
Yes.
And some of these people don't have neither a labor contract nor access to social protection. Look, we cannot accept this going on, because this is not the European social model. This is not the Nordic model. So we need to make sure, and that's why we need to have European action, that there is a general law making sure that everybody, whatever the job, whatever the sector, has two very important things. One is a clear and decent labor contract. The second is access to social protection.
This is the social.
Let me tell you, this is the outcome of the social pillar. I was the rapporteur of this. This is a new development of European social policy, and this shows why we need Europe.
Okay, maybe this was an answer to the question that what would we do about it to have European Union more integrated, and also that the citizens would feel that this union is for me. But before I ask your comments, next on the line your comments and questions, but Andrea and Anton would like to hear, what should we do about this? Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, because if you if you look at the dissatisfaction that is there, right? It's very interesting. So people are very dissatisfied. People are looking actually into the direction of illiberal ideas, and they're supporting increasingly the right-wing option. And so it's very crazy. It's right-wing parties that wanted this type of Europe, which is basically sort of market. It's right-wing parties that did very bad immigration laws in many countries because it favored companies. And who gets to blame the left? Who gets to blame the left? Who wants to protect people? And the left has no answer, no good answer in rebutting those, I think, very strange sort of idea that you have all the guilt. Because what you actually see is that social democratic parties, when in power, they do better economically. So even in terms of pure economic growth, they do better. They are far better at this redistribution, and they create better and more equal societies. They were always on the right side of politics. Please defend your history. You were the first with the liberals to defend women's rights and a vote for women. Social benefits for everybody, state pensions, stuff like that. We were always on the right side of history. But we don't defend that history, but also we don't know in the current time why we are doing what we're doing. We are still defending people who are less off. That's what we're doing. And that's good. You need to defend that. And you need to say to those people who make Europe into a pure market system and giving free rein to banks rather than to citizens, that is the wrong Europe. And you have to be much stronger. Yeah. And the Labour parties across Europe, the Social Democrats across Europe, have gone far too much into the direction of basically trying to be better liberals than liberals themselves, better pro-market than the right-wing parties.
We are no longer there. I must tell you.
I don't know why you're doing that. We're not against the market. I'm not against the market, but the market creates inequality. The Social Democrats are the guarantee against inequality. And why are you not doing this?
This is very interesting. Exactly, there was a very nice speech that you gave, and I think we with Maria agree completely with the achievements of the Social Democrats and the left parties. And what I think is quite, it was a remarkable thing if you think about the Brexit and the vote, why people voted as they did. Of course, we can never go into the heads of each and every voter, but still, the parties that really propagated the Brexit vote and really wanted that, and had it done, like the part of the Conservative Party and the UKIP, these are the parties that got people to vote against Europe because of the internal problems and the problems within that country, within the Great Britain, people without jobs, without education, youth without future, and so on. So these people voted in this referendum in this way, and at the same time, these are the parties that are actually propagating more of these policies. They want more uncontrollable markets. They want less welfare for people. They don't care about jobs, and they don't care about the future of education. So I have to say, this is a very, very canny political strategy, but it is very detrimental. It is destroying that society.
But you agree with what Andre said? What should be done in order to get more integration?
What have we proposed? Maria can tell about, for example, the changes in the Growth and Stability Pact. We are proposing changes.
Well, let me tell you something. It is true that in certain moments of their history, Social Democrats were not clear enough. But our direction now is pretty clear. Is, first of all, to put investment again in the map of European economic policy. And we are doing this because we have now a European investment plan, and we need to make it bigger. The second one is, in fact, to have the room to invest inside the Stability and Growth Pact. Because we cannot go on with this kind of asphyxie when we need to make big investment, to move to a low-carbon economy, to make the best of the digital revolution. And then we have another very important commitment taken during a social democrat government in Sweden, the European Social Pillar, and backed by us in the European Parliament. And look, this is now being translated into new laws, labor contracts for everybody, social protection for everybody, work-life balance for everybody, and making sure that the social policy will be in this direction. So this is a big fight. Of course, let's see, but I must tell you that we count on our Finnish colleagues. Mia Petra was there with us.
Discussing with voters.
Is over there. And the new ones coming, because we need to have, let me tell you, because
please,
this is a message
I promised them some questions.
The Nordic model is the most advanced social model in Europe. And you should know this has inspired even the Lisbon Treaty, and before that, the so-called Lisbon Strategy. So I myself, I'm Portuguese, but an admirer of the Nordic model. And again, we can find this imprint in the European social pillar. So let's use it.
So copy-paste for all Europe.
Yes, it sounds simple. But thank you. This was a good insight to what do you see that as the most effective tool to get Europe more integrated and the citizens feel that this is indeed for us, economical policies, investments and social pillar. But your comments, your questions, what do you see about with the current situation? And short questions, I will, as you have hopefully noticed, I'm trying to keep the answer short. Yes, there is mics here. If you can please present yourselves and then ask question.
So thank you very much for your discussion here. The crucial question, in my opinion, is that inside of in the connection of the treaties of the European Union, the consolidated treaties, it seems to be so that they have taken the main position to the markets and not for the democratic states. They are excluded from the concept. And this means that this neoliberal concept is always on the first place. And I would like to ask from Marianne, from Andre and Anton, is it possible to change or to get new options without changes in the treaties?
Yes. Do we need more treaties, less treaties to get it? With Andre, Anton, start.
So let me start by saying that these treaties is not what needs to be changed first. Because if you see, for example, what is the problem in the minds of voters is the morality that Europe portrays. What is the reality in different countries is that the left is losing power. I come from a country where I grew up with the left having at least control of almost half of parliament. They could sometimes force their way into government. Now, I think there will be a sort of a permanent 20 years, the left will be out of power. There's only a few pockets now where the left has any muscle. So I think it's very important to see where we are now. The left will not be able, neither in national politics and certainly not in the next European Parliament, where they might be the 4th or 5th largest political group. They might not be able to change anything in terms of, wide-ranging new contracts and treaties. And I think we shouldn't, because they will be worse, because there will be in most countries a right-wing government, or worse, more Orbáns and Kaczynskis. Or there will be a minority social democratic partner, which means that you'll be part of that basically right-wing probably consensus that will exist. So I think what is very crucial now is that social democrats, together with Greens and leftist parties, make very clear that there is an alternative to austerity, that there is an alternative in terms of a social market. We're not against capitalism. We embrace capitalism because it creates wealth, but it creates something else, and that is inequality, enormous inequality. And inequality didn't decrease. And I think peace is not the absence of war. Peace is that we have a fairer society, that we care for each other, not only to prevent that our sons are going to shoot each other, but that we take care of our mothers and our sisters and our sons and fathers.
Okay.
And that's not what we're doing anymore.
You. Just a short reply to this good question. Thank you.
First of all, I agree with the Galtung definition of war or peace. That's very good. There are problems in the treaties, but this is not the main problem. I mean, it's about legitimacy, for me at least, it is about output legitimacy. It is about what is the system producing for you. We have federations like the German one or in the US that have been functioning with their legal codification for centuries or for decades, and they work in different ways. They produce different kinds of products and welfare for people depending on the political balance that's in them. So I think we cannot fix the problems of the European Union, for example, just by giving more power to the European Parliament. This is like rearranging the deck stools of the Titanic. That's not the answer. The answer must come from the profound understanding of that if you have destroyed communities, if you do not understand the meaning of what social inclusion means, and if you don't care about that, like the right-wing governments don't, you are actually destroying also the European project and disintegrating it from the inside. But it's not a question of treaties, it's a question of political will.
Okay, and Maria.
Yeah, to reply to your question. In fact, as I told you, the Lisbon Treaty is still not complete. Certainly we could improve it in the economic and the social area. Nevertheless, I agree with Anton that this is not the priority. We can do a lot inside this treaty. And I was just identifying priorities we are really pushing for: investment plan, social pillar, these are good examples, completing the economic and monetary union, and making the best of European external action, because this is a moment where we need, I'm not afraid of the world, to strengthen European sovereignty, to make Europe a big player, to deal with the new situation we have in the world. All this is possible in the framework of the Lisbon Treaty. Nevertheless, let me also refer about what we can do, what can be done by social democrats. Well, of course, we are challenging now with two opponents. The neoliberals, we know very much about them, and new ones, which is not only about populism or a liberal democracy. This is about, let me use the word, nationalism. This is a new trend coming back, which is a big illusion because we cannot solve our problems going back to just national borders. What is the role of progressives and social democrats in this new environment? I would say is to provide a full alternative to the neoliberal agenda and showing that we are the ones who can really protect people. And nationalists are just spreading a wrong illusion. We are the ones. And we should, in fact, lead pro-European progressive forces. My assessment, of course, you are the expert on electoral trends, but let me tell you, Andrew, that we are still working with the possibility, which is the following. In 1 year time, we might have between 6, hopefully 8 governments, so it's not a small presence in the European Council. And when it comes to European Parliament, we know that the next one will have a majority which is more complex, depending on 3 groups, perhaps 4. But I'm challenging you, your work. I think that Social Democrats still keep the possibility to remain the second. This is not easy, but this is still possible. So this is, in fact, the question I have for you.
Well, I doubt that very seriously because our UK friends might be leaving, which is a large portion of our group.
I know.
And the Conservatives are not with the EPP or with the Liberals. They have their own group. So we suffer most there as Social Democrats. We've lost in the Netherlands, France, Sweden, Germany, Italy, dramatically. Not a little bit, dramatically. I think if you turn up third, I would be super surprised. I would party probably all night. I think I would even be happy with 4, but I'm fearing 5th. And let me tell you why that is. I think it is because the European Union itself has created a very interesting new dynamic and conflict between, I would say, areas where it's very good to live and people are connected to this globalized world or are actually profiting from it. And you see even rich people there, middle class people, moving towards the left, not because they need social democracy for themselves. They can vouch for themselves. People like me, we start companies. I don't need social democracy for me. I need social democracy for my mother, who always worked her entire life, who can't afford anything, who needs that state pension. So people are now flocking towards social democracy in wealthier parts of the world because they see what social democracy does for others. It is an altruistic caring of others, even if those others are not your family.
But you are giving an argument to me, eh? No. I agree with you.
But you are not portraying, you are not giving, and there's a better because you're from Portugal did well. They actually have a 1-seat majority and they need to govern with the communists, by the way, who were reluctant to do that. But anyway, they have a majority of 1 vote, okay? So wow, we are a government in 1 country. We are not telling people what the morality is of our policies. We are not engaging with the real worries of 2 or 3 generations. And I am worried about the fact that we're focusing too much on all kinds of specifics. And if you talk to people, people don't know the exact policies. They don't know the effect of several policies. You have to talk about the morality. That's why the right is winning. The right is very good in portraying a sort of morality, a sort of honesty, a sort of hard working, then you get your money. If we forget the left wing, morality of it, which is
I want to ask Anton how to make people listen.
How to make people? I was thinking about this right wing, what it's saying, and I was thinking about.
Yes, but let's the whole point what Andre said, and also Maria pointed. Maria said that we need to make people to understand in Europe that we can best protect them and their rights. So and Andre's been talking in many of his good points about how to make people listen. So I'm asking, my question to you is now how to make people listen.
At least for our, I don't know whether that's the key to the success, the latest success in the polls or not. But what we started to do was that we started to talk about the future. We did not talk about the past anymore, which has been apparently the problem for many of the social democratic or the center-left parties across Europe. That, okay, you're the best experts in the past because pretty much the whole welfare state is of your doing. Thank you, chapeau. But that's not enough because we want to know about the future. We want to know what's going to happen to our children in the future, and we want to know how it's going to be for my mother in the elderly care and so on. And this is what we started to do with our Finland 2030 program. We enjoyed we had the 450 members to do that, and this is what we've been doing and producing policy proposals on that. I know Andre thinks that people are they don't care about policy proposals, but I think that at least what they care about is the future. They want to see that someone has a vision of how the future should look like. Not all the answers, because nobody knows even the questions, but at least a vision of where we should be going. And this is what we've been trying to do. But it starts from having a vision and your values, and not playing tactical games, not trying to tactically counteract the other party or whatever they were doing, but proposing your own initiative, your own solution.
Let me ask you, before we talk about the bigger picture, we need to talk about it. I have promised you, maybe somebody's waiting for that debate, but this is so interesting. What do you think? Will people listen in that way? And what did you think about Maria's points, and also what Andre said, that it's in a total different level we need to hear people? Just a comment or a thought? Otherwise I will point out somebody here. Anybody? Or would you like to ask something about the current situation? Do I see? No? We've spoken.
See, their political needs are
yes.
Well fulfilled.
Well, I have asked. No need to force anybody.
Can I speak about the elephant in the room? Because
yes, you can speak if you speak shortly, please.
Well, the elephant in the room, because so far we have not mentioned this, is something with implications for the electoral trends, which is the so-called issue of migration and refugees.
Okay.
And labor migration.
Yes, and I think you agree with me that this has played a role in changing the political landscape in many member states. So let me tell you, because I need to be short, I know, what should be the progressive position to deal with this, once and for all, because we had some debates, some hesitation, some divergences even. But, well, I just came from New York, where we, as FEPS president, I ran a big conference on this. And I believe that it is possible for us progressives to deal with this, building on our values and in an organized way. It's very simple. First, make the distinction between refugees, one thing, and economic migrants, second. If they are refugees, yes, we need to provide them asylum. This is according to our values. Then we have a European border. We need to build up this European border, because otherwise this will be replaced by national borders and will undermine all our free space for mobility. But with this European border, we organize safe way to manage migration according to our possibilities to integrate people. And if we receive them, they should be properly integrated. But we need to conduct this in an orderly, value-based way. I believe this is the message we should provide. We are not in favor of no walls or just walls. And the last part of the solution is to work with the origin countries. One of the big tasks of the European Union for the next years is to go out with a real partnership with Africa. And I really think that now you are preparing your presidency, upcoming Finnish presidency, in such a crucial moment. Look, if you can give an input for this, it will be just great.
Okay, thank you. Andre?
This is half the story. Because from a perspective of voters, there's something other going on there. And they see immigration, labor migration, and also refugees as things that create an unfair society. Let me tell you what voters say what is unfair. It's unfair that people come in and jump the queue. They have an idea that people come here and get things they're not entitled to. The non-deserving. They jump queues in housing because they need to be housed, right? So the social housing gets crammed in some cities with refugees. This is unfair for people who've been long on lists. That's an unfair thing. Unfair in terms of labor market. There is, and we cannot deny that, labor migration represses wages and represses workers' rights. this is something that people find unfair. There's many things where I identified 7 or 8 things that just voters mentioned, and I'm talking about left-wing voters, identify as things being unfair about labor migration and immigration and refugees. And when you only address a sort of, oh, we have to, talk to these countries, we are not dealing with the effects on the ground now in particularly larger communities, where there is a lot of, where the immigrants concentrate, where you see that there is a new, I would say, new social stratification emerging, which creates a new social reality for many people, especially in the labor market. People who are already vulnerable because younger people have worse chances on the labor market already, have already worse contracts, have already less access to all kinds of services that I automatically have access to with my nice fixed job with a high income and my fixed pension.
But that's why we need the social pillar at the same time.
So you should start taxing, taxing the people who are, these older generation that never paid their taxes. And they get angry and you lose that electorate, fine. But in terms of honesty and fairness and redistribution, you need to give that to the younger generation what you gave that generation. You also need to start taxing companies who now evade taxes, even inside Europe. Can I be super angry as an entrepreneur that I pay all my taxes and Google pays 0?
But the Commission has sued Google, and I guess the Commissioner is taking care of that, isn't she?
Can I laugh? It's not happening. It's not happening.
We hope for that.
It's not happening.
Is that because of the European Union, or is that because of the capitals that is not happening?
Look, the European Union did something very good. They start saying to telephone companies, you can't charge roaming costs because I finished Helsinki. We're going to just stop that. You can't steal from people. I love that policy. Can we do that to all companies now, please?
We agree, and I think this whole thing with taxation, tax evasion, competition policy of the future with these digital companies, this is of crucial importance. But coming back to this situation in migration and in many of the European countries, first of all, it varies a lot. You have completely different kinds of numbers of people, both refugees and people that immigrated of other reasons, first of all. But at the same time, if you look at, for example, of Estonia, extremely low numbers of foreigners in general. And what has happened during the last year, they have a right-wing populist party that's come up to, I don't know, almost 20% of voter support on these issues. So this is not a question of actual, it's about perception, not only about whether there are actual problems. But there are actual problems, and I think the problem with the debate, at least what we have in this country, is that it's a polarized debate where the other side somehow is like it's dwelling in its own fear-mongering, and everybody that comes from outside is somehow wrong. And then you have the other side that says there are no issues, and if you deal with any issues, you will be labeled as a racist. But there must be some common ground in between this, where you actually address the problems, for example, of social exclusion in housing, parts of suburbs that have huge problems, language skills and so on, the inclusion of the people in this society. These are actual topics that you need to maintain, manage, and they cost money. So you need a budget for that.
Well, there's an actual problem with the comment strong voice in foreign policy in the EU. If we look at what Putin and Trump are doing, and the United States are withdrawing from many contracts, this is a very bad news for small countries like Finland, maybe also for a small country like Portugal. But how to have a stronger common voice? And do you see that the Lisbon Treaty, maybe I ask you first, since you are one of the key persons behind that Lisbon Treaty, that it brought us the foreign minister and also the European External Action Service. Has it helped as much as you believed? An honest reply, please.
Yes, I think it was really important to start building a European diplomatic service. So we see this now across the world. Of course, it depends on the way we work then with the national diplomacies, which are also representing in the capitals. But this makes a difference. But now we need to go to a new stage. And the Lisbon Treaty enables this. And the new stage is to say, we, European Union, we are key player, able to discuss equal footing with the United States, with China, with Russia, with our own values, with our own agenda. And by the way, in the current world, European Union is the best pillar for an open world based on cooperation. European Union is now the most active continent setting trade deals with the other parts of the world. We concluded one with Canada. We are completing another one with Japan. We have strategic partnerships everywhere. And so, all of a sudden, we are the most important pillar of the multilateral system.
But do you see the current situation at the moment that the EU is a very strong player? That we have a...
let me give you an example. When Trump came here to Helsinki, meeting Putin, the same days, we had European Union representatives, Juncker and Tusk, in Japan and China, showing we are not depending on you, Americans and Russians. We are able to set direct agreements with all over the world, and we are respecting to do so, and we intend to do so.
It was a very visible act.
Yes, and when we are moving to a century where Asia will be so prominent, it's very important that Europe has a strong presence.
But let me ask you something. I know China is taking, we all know that China is taking the place that the United States is leaving now and having more position, but China is bringing their own values, and the core of their values, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is not human rights.
Yes.
Is that okay for you?
Okay. Look, I have a long work with China. I've been in China for 20 years intensively because, of course, everybody knows this is a key player now. This is a big civilization. Nevertheless, this is not a democratic regime. So how should we play with China? I believe that the right way for us is not to antagonize, is to engage with them with three fronts. The ground where we can work together, and there are many issues, climate change, whatever has to do with the engagement for taming the push for sustainable development. On this, China is making an effort. Then we have issues where we have different views, example, trade, because we still have a big Chinese surplus. And then we have the issues where we are completely different, which is the one you just referred. And on this, we cannot make concessions. We need to say to China that if now NGOs are being undermined in China, we cannot accept this. We are against this.
But if China is investing hugely in Africa because of the resources.
It's true.
They have the resources. Let's pretend a situation. They have the resources that the European Union would like to have access to. And then you have, well, we have these human rights, we have workers' rights, we have social rights, but we really would like to have some of those resources. How do you negotiate when you're not on the same...
Yeah, in fact, we are losing ground regarding the relationship with Africa. And that's one the other reasons why we do need a real partnership between Europe and China, going beyond the colonial past, which has a lot of traumas, and setting an equal footing partnership with Africa, because this might be a win-win. Africa has a huge potential. Africa is changing, has many problems of governance, of underdevelopment, but has huge potential. So my response to your issue is, of course, we cannot now prevent China being present in Africa, but we need ourselves to engage much more.
Okay.
But let me give you another thing which is important for us, is the Silk Road project.
Yes.
Because China has now an ambitious project with One Belt, One Road, the Silk Road. Of course, I know that Finland is paying a lot of attention to all the interface with China, and rightly so. From my viewpoint, the Silk Road is not just a plan for the Chinese neighborhood. It's a plan to change the geostrategic balance of the world. This is typically Chinese strategic long-term thinking. So my question is, what do we have, we Europeans, which is equivalent to this?
Yes.
Because we don't have.
No, we don't.
We should have a powerful initiative to work with our neighborhood, but also to ensure a more balanced world order.
I understand. Andre and Anton, briefly your thoughts about how to have a stronger common voice in the foreign policy. Andre, if you start.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult because I think from perspective of voters it doesn't matter. Eh? Foreign policy for voters hardly ever matters in an election. But I think for Europe it's very important because of course the success of Europe is how it integrates and connects to the other large markets in the world. And I think, for example, not only the Chinese, what's happening in China, which is, by the way, also not an open society, is not only a non-democratic society, but also free enterprise is not present there in many respects. So China is important, but what I think is also important is the changes in Latin America and even in the US. The US is also changing, right? Especially under Trump. And so, for example, TIPP is now sort of out there, right? And I think it's a good thing because it's also a moment for us to reconsider. Because many of left-wing voters, potential voters for Social Democrats, were very unhappy about these treaties. And this, I think, is also an opportunity to redefine how you do international trade. How to have more fairer trade and open our markets, for example, to North Africa. If we really want to solve problems, open your markets to North Africa. Include the black hole of Europe more inside, which is like Serbia, Montenegro, Albania. Not democratic states. Horribly terrible, problematic states in terms of failure. But you need to include them. And I think having a policy is good towards China, but I think a real policy would be how do we include North Africa, which is strongly connected also to immigration, to the European continent. The Mediterranean has always been an economic entity in itself. We are now excluding large parts of that territory in a natural economic situation. Okay. And I think that is, for the short term, far more important than say, the Chinese.
Thank you.
Completely agree with this, and I think, of course, it's interesting and it's a bit alarming even to see the Chinese investments in Africa. But at the same time, it is highly of double standards and of morale for Europeans to come and say that this port should not be built because, well, we actually came earlier and took whatever you had, but we never built anything for you. So, I mean,
it's slave trade. Yeah.
Yeah, China is it seems to be changing its policy. It's always been sort of inward looking, and it's just like, do not make any trouble, and as long as we can trade, we don't care about what's happening in the world otherwise. They seem to be changing their policy a bit, and we have to...
But the common voice, how to get the common voice?
Yeah, we have to both adjust to that and then have the common voice. I think our problem is, well, Kissinger said that there's no phone that he can, there's no one who picks up the phone if he calls Europe. I think the problem is that we have very highly developed, elaborate nerves, but we have no brain in Europe.
Really?
Well, I mean, if you think of there is no central one specific place where the foreign policy has ever been decided in the way that it would be in the. We have these nerves in the capitals, but we don't quite have the brain yet.
Yeah, even I must say that with Mogherini, there was really a real effort to improve this coordination. You have an example, the Iran deal. It's typically European diplomacy, and with a quite large support from the member states. Nevertheless, let me tell you that there is now a proposal on the table, a controversial one, but I refer to this is perhaps we could take more decisions on foreign affairs by using qualified majority voting. Because sometimes you have 2 or 3 countries hesitating, and because of that, we don't have a single voice. And the same should happen with the euro. Because we can use the euro as a stronger instrument to support our economic relationships. This would be the case in Iran. Now we depend on dollars, and that's why Iran deal can be undermined by the United States. So now we have on the table, can we accept that some decisions are taken by just qualified majority voting? And yes, I think we should.
Okay. Maria, Andre, Anton, I thank you so much for this discussion. It was a good debate. I'm so happy, and I hope that you heard also things that interested you. I'd like to propose that us to give a big hand to these panelists. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, it is time for a summary. I believe it's Kaisa who will let us know more about that. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank
thank you so much for the panelists, and thank you very much for Kirsi. As you can see, it is very good to have the professionals handle the discussions, because in that way we get a really good answers from the experts as well. Now I will change to Finnish, and those of you, if you need to use the headsets, please do, because we will have start the bilingual part of this event. Eli siis, koska olemme Suomessa ja näitä keskusteluja on aivan liian harvoin Euroopan tulevaisuudesta, Euroopan unionin politiikasta, niin kuin aiemmin tässä on moneen kertaan sanottu, niin me olemme myös järjestäjinä toivoneet, että nimenomaan tänään käytetään myös molempia kieltä ja tätä keskustelua käydään myös suomeksi. Ja sen takia ollaan pyydetty Antti Rinnettä, mä en tiedä aikooko hän noudattaa, mutta olemme pyytäneet häntä pitämään summauspuheenvuoron suomeksi ja näistä käydyistä keskusteluista. En yhtään kadehdi tätä tehtävää, sen takia on erittäin hienoa, että sen pitää joku muu kuin minä. Keskustelut ovat äärimmäisen mielenkiintoisia ja monipuolisia, mutta tosiaan Antti Rinne tulee vetämään keskustelua yhteen, sitten mä kerron vielä vähän sen jälkeen käytännön asioista liittyen lounaisia iltapäivän työpajoihin, mutta Antti Rinne, ole hyvä.
Thank you, Kaisa, very much. It has been very interesting and lively discussion, and it is not so easy to make summary about this discussion. But I will say that I have written about 4 pages about remarks, but I don't use them. Only 2 things I take up. Niin hyvät ihmiset, toivottavasti, että tämä suomen kieli ei joudu siitä, että ne epäilee toi Kaisa ja muut, että ei osaa puhua englantia. Mä ajattelin yhden asian nostaa esille tuolta ensimmäisestä paneelista liittyen tämän emun kehittämiseen. Kun mietitään, mitä tapahtui 2009 lähtien unionin sisällä, niin ehkä yksi sellainen keskeinen havainto on se, että ei niinkään julkisten talouksien ylijäämä-alijäämä keskustelu ole merkityksellistä, vaan se oleellinen juttu on se, että mitä tapahtuu Euroopan sisäisessä vaihtotaseessa. Ja mun mielestä meidän pitäisi käydä keskustelu laajasti Euroopassa siitä, että vaihtotaseen ylijäämä-alijäämä tasot ensinnäkin tulisi symmetrisiksi. Tällä hetkellä on makrotalousmekanismissa määritelty eri tasoisiksi, taitaa olla 4 prosenttiyksikköä tai 3 prosenttiyksikköä alijäämä ja ylijäämä on 6 prosenttiyksikköä, ja se on vain näissä makrotaloudellisissa määritteissä. Ja mä luulen, että me löydettäisiin huomattavasti parempaa tasapainoa tulevaisuudessa Euroopan sisällä, unionin sisällä, tai talousalueen tai raha-alueen sisällä sillä, että tämä vaihtotase otettaisiin yhdeksi selkeäksi kriteeriksi symmetrisellä tavalla. Mä epäilen, että sillä löydettäisiin huomattavasti parempia vaihtoehtoja, tai sen kautta löytyisi parempia vaihtoehtoja emun kehittämiselle. Sitten toinen semmoinen keskeinen asia on, että on tärkeää, että on yhteisiä sääntöjä, on tärkeää, että myöskin niitä noudatetaan. Mä olin vuoden verran valtiovarainministerinä, ja kyllä mä tulin huomaamaan niiden keskustelun aikana, että hyvin usein törmättiin siihen, että tehty hyviä päätöksiä, mutta niiden yhteinen noudattaminen jäsenvaltioiden keskuudessa ei toteutunut. Ja se aiheuttaa semmoista epävarmuutta, epäluottamusta jäsenvaltioiden kesken, joka vaarantaa yhtenäisyyttä, yhtenäistä politiikkaa. Nämä tämmöisenä havaintona emuun liittyen, ja sitten mä totean, että kun lähtee liikkeelle unionin synnystä, niistä askelista, joita lähdettiin ottamaan, niin ihan keskeinen lähtökohta oli se, että rakennetaan rauhaa Euroopan sisälle. Se, että taloudelliset tai sosiaaliset seikat ei olisikaan syynä enää sodille. Me kokemukset ensimmäisen ja toisen maailmansodan jälkeen oli sellaisia, jotka tämmöistä yhteisöllistä ajattelua vei eteenpäin. Ja minusta tästä näkökulmasta voi todeta Euroopan onnistuneen kohtalaisen hyvin tässä asiassa. Mutta matkan varrella vuosikymmenten mittaan tässä on tullut paljon uusia aiheita, jotka pistää miettimään, että millä tavalla yhdessä asioita voi viedä eteenpäin. Että jos muistaa sen, että eurooppalaiset valtiot maailman mittakaavassa on pieniä tai keskisuuria valtioita, joiden kyky vaikuttaa globaaliin kehitykseen on yksinään hyvin vaikeaa, mutta yhdessä silloin iso merkitys monissa asioissa. Ja mä sanon, että ilmastonmuutos, ympäristöön liittyvät lajien massatuho ja tämmöiset asiat on asioita, joissa ei Suomi eikä Saksa yksinään eikä mikään muukaan Euroopan unionin valtio kykene vaikuttamaan, ja sen takia ilmastonmuutos, joka on meidän koko sivilisaation tulevaisuuden kannalta aivan äärimmäisen nopeasti ratkaistava, tärkeästi ratkaistava asia, on asia, jossa pitää vahvistaa eurooppalaista johtajuutta. Tällä hetkellä sääntöperusteinen maailma on monista syistä kyseenalaistettu, aika itsekkäistäkin syistä, jos ajattelee presidentti Trumpin valintaa ja sen jälkeistä politiikkaa Yhdysvalloista näkien. Ja tästä lähtökohdasta on tärkeää, että yhteisen sääntöperusteisen maailmanjärjestyksen ylläpitäminen, vahvistaminen on eurooppalaista johtajuutta. Me tarvitaan nyt semmoista uutta otetta eurooppalaisen yhteistyön, jossa jäsenmaiden kesken vahvistetaan Euroopan unionin puitteissa yhteistä agendaa näissä isoissa asioissa, joissa vain ja ainoastaan eurooppalaisella yhteistyöllä ja globaalilla yhteistyöllä voidaan viedä politiikkaa oikealla tavalla eteenpäin. Minusta tämä on niin kuin äärimmäisen tärkeä havainto se, että maailmassa tulee eteen jatkuvasti kysymyksiä, jotka edellyttää yhteisiä ratkaisuja, edellyttää sellaista toimintaa, jossa nähdään yhdessä ne kokonaisuudet, joiden puitteissa se yhteistyön toteuttaminen merkittää. Mä ajattelen verovälttelyä esimerkiksi. Verovälttely on asia, jossa suomalaiset ei yksin pysty tekemään yhtään mitään, mutta eurooppalaisissa puitteissa pystytään jotakin tekemään ja globaalissa puitteissa voidaan tehdä paljonkin, mutta se vaatii vahvaa johtajuutta myöskin eurooppalaisista viedä tätä asiaa, niitä asioita eteenpäin. Musta Antoni hienosti tuossa paneelissa totesi sen sosiaalidemokraattien tämän hetken tilanteen Suomessa. Me ollaan 2017 puoluekokouksen jälkeen saatu uudelleen se sosiaalidemokraattien historiallisesti vahva voimavara käyttöön. Meillä on ohjelmatyö vahvistunut. Meillä on siis, niin kuin Anton totesi, 450 ihmistä 26. työryhmässä plus muutamassa ad hoc työryhmässä rakentamassa meidän poliittista ohjelmaa. Sen keskeisenä ikään kuin sateenvarjona on se, että me ankkuroitiin meidän politiikkaohjelmat YK:n kestävän kehityksen 2030 periaatteisiin. Jokainen politiikkalohko läpäistään sillä, että millä tavalla taloudellinen, ekologinen ja sosiaalinen kehitys voidaan saada toteutumaan tulevaisuudessa eri yhteiskuntapolitiikan lohkoilla, ei pelkästään Suomessa, vaan eurooppalaisittain myös globaalissa maailmassa. Ja tämä on ollut mun arvioni mukaan yksi keskeinen voimavara siihen, että minkä takia sosiaalidemokraattien kannatus nyt viimeisten oikeastaan vuoden aikana on todella vahvistunut. Ja mä luulen, että tähän liittyy juuri se analyysi tai ihmisten mielessä tapahtuva muutos, että nyt ollaan nähty, että sosiaalidemokraattien liike on liike, jossa on selkeä visio 2030-luvulle ja siitä eteenpäin. Se vakuuttaa ihmisiä tällä hetkellä, että me ollaan pystytty koulutuspolku 2030 rakentamaan. Se vakuuttaa ihmisiä, että meillä on näkemys siitä, miten työelämän tasa-arvoa, perhevapaajärjestelmää uudistaa ja viedä eteenpäin. Se vakuuttaa ihmisiä, että meillä on näkemys siitä, että miten verotuksen tulevaisuutta rakennetaan. Se vakuuttaa ihmisiä se, että me tiedetään, että millä tavalla työelämän, talouden uudistamista pitää pystyä tekemään. Yksi asia, mistä mä epäilen, että tulee isompi poliittinen keskustelu, ei pelkästään Suomessa, vaan myöskin Euroopassa, on se, että millä tavalla suhtaudutaan tämmöisiin tulevaisuusinvestointiin. Muistatte, Suomessa 1967 rakennettiin peruskoulu, se lähti liikkeelle asteittain. Sen hinta oli silloin 189 miljoonaa markkaa. Se on muutettuna nykytalouteen, BKT-tasoon ja rahan arvoon miljardi-investointi. Silloin sitä vastusti vahvat oikeistolaiset voimat, että tämmöistä ei pidä lähteä viemään liikkeelle tai viemään eteenpäin. Se lähdettiin viemään sosiaalidemokraattien voimin eteenpäin. Ja nyt me ollaan tilanteessa, jossa oppimisen oppiva tekoäly, alustatalous tulee muuttamaan maailmaa, en nopeammin tai hitaammin, mutta joka tapauksessa tulee muuttamaan maailmaa paljon. Ja vain osaaminen, koulutus, tutkimus, tieteen kunnianpalautus on niitä elementtejä, joilla voidaan näistä asioista selvitä. Ei pelkästään Suomessa, vaan Euroopassa. Mä oon tehnyt esityksen siitä, että Euroopassa rakennettaisiin tämmöinen superyliopisto. Sillä tarkoitan yliopistojen verkostoa, jolla on rajaton resurssi tutkimukseen ja tutkijakoulutukseen. Me taistellaan tällä hetkellä Euroopassa, tai taistelu on väärä sana, me kamppaillaan Euroopassa siitä, että millä tavalla Euroopan talouskasvu saadaan kestävälle tasolle, kestävälle kehitykselle talouden muutosten, globaalien muutosten myötä. Siinä pärjätään vain ja ainoastaan sillä, että meillä on resursseja perustutkimukseen, meillä on resursseja tutkijavaihtoon sillä tavalla, että Euroopassa on vähän niin kuin MIT:ssä tai Harvardissa, Yhdysvalloissa riittävät resurssit tehdä kaikissa asioissa, jotka nähdään ilmiöinä, semmoiset tutkia kannattaa tutkimustyötä, joista sitten tulee soveltavaa tutkimusta, joiden kautta voidaan sitten rakentaa uutta tulevaisuutta talouteen, uudenlaista innovaatiotoimintaa yrityksiin ja yksityisen julkisen sektorin yhteistyöllä semmoista maailmaa, jossa kestävän kehityksen keskeisillä periaatteilla kuljetaan eteenpäin. Mä uskon, että eurooppalainen politiikka voi vahvistua, integraatio voi vahvistua sen kautta, että me ymmärretään, että on hyvin paljon asioita jatkuvasti muuttumassa globaalissa maailmassa, jotka voi ratkaista vain yhteistyöllä. Mä en ole kovin kiinnostunut siitä, että millä tavalla eurooppalaisia rakenteita muokataan, tuleeko eurooppalaiset valtiovarainministeriötä tai tuleeko muita institutionaalisia muutoksia. Se oleellinen asia on se, että niin kuin taisi olla Maria, joka totesi, että yhteistyö, tai Antoni myöskin totesi, että yhteistyö, poliittinen tahto asioiden eteenpäin viimeiseksi vallitsee isoissa asioissa. Yksi keskeinen asia myöskin Euroopan sisällä, joka huolestuttaa kovasti, on eurooppalaisten perusarvojen, eurooppalaisten yhteisten periaatteiden inflaatio, mikä tällä hetkellä on joissakin maissa vahvasti nähtävissä. Oikeusvaltioperiaate, demokratia, ihmisarvo loukkaamattomana on niitä perusarvoja, joiden varaan eurooppalaista politiikkaa on rakennettu. Nyt se näyttäytyy valitettavasti myös meidän sisarpuolueissa joissakin maissa tällä hetkellä Euroopassa olevan kyseenalaistettu. Taustalla on globaalin maailman muutokset, sen vaikutukset ihmisten arkeen, näköala tulevaisuuteen on pimenossa monella ihmisellä ja se antaa kasvualustaa populistisille liikkeille, nationalistisille liikkeille. Sosiaalidemokraattisen liikkeen täytyy olla se selkeä suuntaan osoittava liike Euroopassa, joka kykenee näyttämään, että tonne suuntaan kun kuljetaan, sieltä löytyy se hyvä tulevaisuus kaikille eurooppalaisille. Minusta se tarkoittaa kaiken kaikkiaan, se tarkoittaa yhteistyötä, se tarkoittaa yhteistyön tiivistämistä, se tarkoittaa sitä, että yhteistyössä rakennetaan yhteistä Eurooppaa, yhteistä maailmaa, jossa tunnistetaan ne ongelmat, jotka koko sivilisaatiota tällä hetkellä uhkaa. Tämä on, ystävät, se viesti, jonka haluan jättää tästä yhteenvetona tämän paneelin keskustelijoiden kautta tulleisiin asioihin. Kiitoksia.
Kiitos oikein paljon, Antti, tästä summauksesta. Sitten vielä ennen kuin päästään teidät lounaalle, niin sellaisia käytännön asioita, eli tosiaan lounas on tarjolla, se on kaikille teille osallistujille ilmainen, se on tarjolla tuolla alakerrassa. Siellä on jonkin verran pöytiä, siellä voi syödä tai sitten lounaan kanssa voi tulla takaisin tähän ylös. Ja tosiaan meidän puhujat ovat lupautuneet myös olemaan täällä paikalla, eli voi myös käydä keskustelua heidän kanssansa tässä lounaan aikana. Sitten lounaan jälkeen, älkää vaan kukaan karatko, koska meillä on vielä sitten luvassa 4 todella mielenkiintoista työpajaa, joista englanninkieliset työpajat ovat tuolla alakerrassa ja sitten suomenkieliset työpajat ovat tuolla tästä katsottuna vasemmalla takanurkassa tilassa nimeltä Fönster. Ja meillähän tosiaan on Jaakko Kiander, Pekka Ristelä, Leo Hoffman-Angsthelm ja Christian Krell vielä sitten iltapäivällä puhumassa. Eli menkää ihmeessä työpajoihin ja osallistukaa keskusteluun näistä aiheista. Sitten vielä sellainen, että jos haluatte, niin tuolla oikealla on sarja erilaisia julkaisuja, joita myös voi sitten ottaa mukaansa ja jatkaa näitä EU-asioiden ja demokratian ja muista kysymyksistä keskustelua. Kiitos oikein paljon tähänastisesta kaikille puhujille ja oikein hyvää lounasta kaikille. Jatketaan sitten tunnin päästä työpajoilla. Kiitos.